I remember the exact weight of the night, the kind of heaviness that sits in your chest like a fist. It started small, like most bad nights do, beer that went from light to heavy, a joke that slid too far, a swagger that turned into a dare. We were young enough to think we could outrun consequences, old enough to know better but stubborn anyway. My hand closed on a gun that night like it had always been mine to hold, but the truth is I'd never handled one the way I did then. I thought I knew the rules because I'd seen them on screens and heard them in corners where people tried to sound tougher than they really were. The rule I learned that night was different, it was permanent. There's a moment, weird as it sounds, when time folds. 1 second there's laughter and music and the guy next to you moving like nothing's wrong. The next there's that sound, and the leftover silence is like a new language you don't want to learn. I thought the gun was empty. I laughed, like people do when they want to make light of something sharp. I pointed it in a stupid, mock-threatening way, the kind of move we'd all seen in movies, the kind of move that gets you a cheap high. I squeezed the trigger just to hear the click, the joke to puncture the mood, and the world answered with a real bullet. My friend slumped, and the laugh got swallowed by a scream that wasn't mine, and I felt my heart go missing. The arrest was a blur of fluorescent lights and hands that smelled like sanitizer and leftover cigarettes. I remember the booking sheet with my name in block letters and the way my fingers wouldn't stop shaking when they cuffed me. It wasn't just the cuffs, it was the immediate, small death of the future I had assumed. Charges stacked like heavy books, negligent homicide, manslaughter, whatever the paper called it. The words were formal, sterile. None of them fit the way my stomach dropped every time I closed my eyes. In the beginning, I tried to tell myself it was an accident because that's how you stay sane for a minute at a time. You call it that when you're trying to stitch reality back together with thin thread. But there are things accidents don't change: the widening of a mother's eyes, the police photos, the way a room feels emptied of the person who should be there. Regret isn't a single feeling, it's an architecture rooms you walk through all day. Some rooms are heavy with shame, some with memories that punch like a fist. At night I mapped them all. I'd never been to prison before. The first time they opened the heavy door and I saw concrete that had absorbed decades of other people's mistakes, I felt something like vertigo. Not the dramatic kind, more like the slow realization that you're stepping into a place designed to shape you into someone smaller. The intake process chews people up and spits out a number that fits into the system, and for a while that number is what you are. They read the rules like a prayer and you nod, because that's what you're supposed to do. You learn quick that showing you care too much about anything makes you a target. You learn quick that silence has value. But inside, memories are loud. I see his face in the dull light sometimes when I'm on the slab, bed in the cell, the expression half surprised, half betrayed, and it cuts me sharper than any guard's glance. Guilt doesn't let you sleep the way it does on TV. It wakes you at odd hours and makes you taste metal in your mouth. It teaches you, slowly, the contours of your wrongdoing. Not to make excuses, that's the part of me that won't be saved by words, but to understand how a stupid move and a cigarette-laced joke can rearrange so many lives. At first, I tried to live in denial. I told myself that if I didn't say the things out loud, they'd stay small and manageable. That lasted a week, maybe 2. Reality, though, has a way of catching up. Letters come in, and they stack on the cell shelf with the rest of the small things you hold onto. A loose photo, a scribbled note with handwriting that used to mean a life outside. My family tried to visit. They looked through me like I was a glass window with their reflections on one side and my face on the other. The prosecutor's offer landed on the table like a wet cloth. Plea to a lesser charge, sentence that would still take years. I thought of the funeral, the way the casket had felt too small for all the things left unsaid. I thought of the look on the mother's face when she saw me first in court, like someone who had thought she was done being surprised by anything. I took the plea. The system moves slow if you fight it, and some battles cost more than the ones you win. Walking into the wing where I live now, there's a rhythm, metal doors, footsteps, whispers that sound like a second heartbeat. People here have stories the way everyone has a shadow attached, unavoidable. Some are angry all the time. Anger is a currency that buys protection. Some are quiet, like they've folded themselves down small to fit. I learned to watch. You don't have to be loud to be dangerous. Sometimes the quietest people are the ones who can survive longest. In the first nights, everyone watches you watch them. You assemble impressions like survival tools. Who keeps to themselves, who plays the fool to keep trouble away, who monitors the guards' routines and knows when a light flicker is more than coincidence. But for all the watching, there's an aching loneliness that no routine fills. Outside, life keeps moving, and you learn that your absence rewires people they rearrange. People forget birthdays, miss graduations, let errands pile up, and then pretend it's all the way it should be. I kept a small stack of things that reminded me I was still human, a ballpoint pen, a postcard, and the smell of laundry that came from machines that were always too loud. The prison gives you items like these as if to say, see, you can still exist. The real test is whether you can forgive yourself enough to touch those things. There are nights I replay the move 100 times. In some versions I don't laugh. In some versions, my friend shoves me away. In none of them do I rewind time. That's the hardest thing to accept. There's no undo. The only thing left is to breathe, to wake up each morning and make a tiny decision to be less monstrous with each repetition. It's a grind that looks like nothing, but it's everything. Booking is a lesson in humility wrapped in fluorescent light. They strip you of your name in steps. First the getting processed paperwork, then the tattoos of numbers in the system, then the badge of the uniform that means you're no longer free to choose what to wear. They weigh you, fingerprint you, and slide a number across the desk like it's the most ordinary thing in the world. Outside those walls, you're you because you can decide. Inside, someone else decides for you. The mindset shift is subtle, but it's surgical. The first nights are a litany of surprises. You expect physical discomfort, the bunk boards, the thin blanket, the tinny noise of the building, and you get it. What you don't predict is the way the sound of a man breathing next to you can become a map of his life. You learn which sounds are safe and which ones mean trouble. You learn to decode rhythms, the way metal on metal means a guard is coming, the cough that's a rumor turned true, the muffled sob that hides behind laughter. People approach you in waves. Some try to befriend you like they're trimming a vine, slow and careful. Others size you up like a ledger, deciding if you're credit or debt. Then there are the ones who move like predators, watching for the moment when you look the most tired. I tried to be polite. I tried to keep my head down. Politeness is a shield sometimes, and discretion another. A cellmate stays the longest with you, sometimes a few nights, sometimes years. My first cellmate was older, eyelids heavy with stories. He moved through the day as if the place had taught him patience like survival. He didn't talk much about his past. He only offered small rules, like don't touch what isn't yours and never volunteer for things that aren't clearly beneficial to you. Those rules sound obvious until you realize how easily good sense gets swallowed by the scramble for small comforts in here. A cup of coffee, a few extra minutes of hot water, a commissary item. These things become stakes in a game you didn't think you'd learn. The intake pod is full of people who are brittle with shock. Guys who were arrested the night before, faces pale and unmarked by this environment, try to anchor themselves to their outside life with frantic phone calls. Some come with arrogance like armor, swaggering and talking loud in the chow line, trying to convince themselves they aren't afraid. A few weeks in, and the swagger phrase, fear does things to a person. For some it hardens them, for others it bends them into someone quieter, more watchful. I met a handful of folks who I still think about. A guy with a laugh that came out wrong because he'd been in too many fights. A kid who was maybe 20 and had the kind of eyes that had learned too early what hunger looks like. An ex-military dude who kept to schedules and counted the ticks in the hall like a metronome. People find small ways to hold their sanity, books passed hand to hand, trading commissary items, sharing stories from the outside like contraband truths. Those exchanges teach you more about human nature than any classroom ever could. There's a first fight everyone remembers in their own way. Mine wasn't cinematic. It was ugly and slowly escalated from a shouted insult to a push to a hard slam against the metal. The first time I threw a punch, I tasted copper and remembered my friend's face again, and that memory twisted everything into a sharper edge. I didn't want to be a fighter. I wanted to be left alone. But survival isn't always about winning. Sometimes it's about signaling that you're not a light bulb to be flicked off. The scuffle ended with two bruised egos and the kind of respect you buy with pain. After a while, you understand the currency here, not loudness, not fear, but the subtle ways people mark territory and keep it. Sleep is thin in the first weeks. The body keeps time differently when danger is a constant possibility. You wake to the smallest sounds and hold your breath until they pass. There's a different kind of watchfulness that takes over, where you learn to read the room like a book. You get to know the guards too, not their names sometimes, but the way they walk, the jokes they tell, the way they look at people like they're cataloging mistakes. Some guards are bone, deep indifferent. Others have eyes that betray boredom. A few are kinder than they have to be. You learn who to avoid and who might slip you an extra minute of yard time if you can read their mood. Mail is a lifeline. The first letter I got from home felt like a small miracle. It was short, polite, and filled with the careful wording of people who are afraid to say something that might break you more. I saved it like a relic. I read it until the ink started to smear from repetition. It was proof that I still existed in someone else's life, that my absence had weight. But letters also bring news that cuts. A wedding I missed. A job lost. The holidays passing without me. There's a cost to being gone that isn't always measured in days. The commissary becomes an economy. You trade coffee for snacks, stamps for cigarettes, time for a cup of someone else's sympathy. People get good at small hustles. A person who knows how to fix a radio or who can write a neat letter gets more than they might expect. Skills are currency. I learned the value of being useful in ways that didn't hurt anyone, like helping with math for someone trying to budget commissary or teaching someone to write a clean letter. Those little trades bring you human contact that's not transactional in the worst way. Through all of it, the memory of that night sits like a stone in my gut. No amount of new sound or new routine can buff it away. In the quiet hours, it presses, insisting on being felt. You can try to rationalize, say it was a mistake, say it wasn't foreseen, but the truth is what it is, simple and terrible. It's a story you tell yourself daily, and sometimes, if you're honest, you can feel the edges of it get less sharp. That's not forgiveness, that's survival. Forgiveness is an entirely different, harder path. Prison has a rhythm the outside world doesn't keep. Days are measured in counts, chow lines, structured activities, and the tiny rituals we cling to. Wake up is a clang and a count. Bed is a dim light and another count. Between those anchors, 1,000 small choices define the day. You tuck routines under your skin until they feel like the only map you have left. Work detail gives structure. Some of us are on custodial crews, others in the kitchen, some in maintenance. I landed on a detail that let me keep my head down a job that required early mornings and long hours moving boxes. You learn to work with purpose because the faster you do the job, the likelier you are to keep your head clear. There's something about manual labor that keeps the mind occupied. Exhaustion is a kind of mercy. But the job also exposes you to people and gossip, and in here gossip can be as dangerous as a blade. The commissary list becomes a study in priorities. You learn to balance who you are with who you need to be. A box of snacks can buy you goodwill with the right person. Instant coffee can anchor your day. People become experts at stretching their budget and maneuvering through the prison's small economy. I traded favors more slowly than others. My currency was reliability. If I said I'd do something, I followed through. In a place where trust is scarce, that holds value, the yard is both a release and a stage. It's where you stretch your legs and where you test alliances. Men cluster in small groups, doing their own version of social choreography. Handshakes, nods, the subtle sign language of alliances and boundaries. Some play basketball with a competitiveness that's pure theater. Others walk laps and talk quietly. The sun feels strange and bright, like something you don't get to take for granted anymore. Yard time is also where grudges simmer. A glance too long can be interpreted as a challenge, and you learn to measure your gaze. Eyes are weapons here. There are rules that aren't written down. Don't exploit the weak. Don't snitch. Don't try to steal someone's dignity. Break those rules and you don't just lose face, you put yourself at real risk. The idea of honor here is warped. Sometimes it's about retaliation, and sometimes about protecting vulnerable people who don't have a voice. You have to be careful with your morality. It's a delicate thing that can cost you dearly if you wave it like a flag. Religion and introspection take on new shapes in a place like this. Some men find solace in faith groups, in recovery meetings, in structured conversations that let them speak without being judged. Others balk at anything that feels like a bandage. Personally, I oscillated between wanting to talk and wanting to stay silent. Confession doesn't always heal. Sometimes it opens things that aftershock for days. But I tried to pick at the edges of my guilt in those moments, to name the things that made me feel monstrous and see if naming them took some of the sting away. Healthcare in prison is a mix of the necessary and the delayed. An aching back gets a passing glance. A headache can be a long conversation. You learn to self-advocate in small, strategic ways. The guys who know how to paperwork get more attention. The ones who know how to find a sympathetic nurse get better outcomes. Being savvy is part of survival. Sometimes the system forgets you are human because the logistics are huge and the resources are not. That forces you to rely on networks, folks who will alert you when a doc is coming through or who will tag you in when a medication shipment arrives. There's a social ecosystem that grows out of need. Men teach each other trades. One guy showed me how to patch a hole in a jacket. Another taught me how to weave a small basket from scavenged materials. These skills are practical, and they're emotional anchors, proof that we can still make things, still create value in tiny ways. People who are generous here often become pillars. Generosity is a defiant act against the place's tendency to strip you down. Boredom is a monster that eats at you if you let it. Some escape into books, others into workouts that mimic the control they've lost in life. I started reading more and found strange solace in stories about people who made bad choices and somehow kept going. Fiction felt like a mirror and a map. It helped me imagine a life beyond sentences and cells, even if it was a small, stubborn imagining. There are also darker economies. Drugs circulate through tunnels of trust. Phones smuggled or temporarily borrowed become lifelines to the outside the same way letters are. I avoided most of that because getting caught means longer time and more complications. Rules are strict and the consequences sharp. Still, people take risks. Desperation bends the moral compass in ways that are understandable if you stand in their shoes for a minute. Every now and then, something happens that reminds you how close raw violence is. A stolen item becomes a fight. A rumor becomes a wake-up call. You learn to read the signs before they escalate. I learned to take small actions, move a few feet away, change my route to the shower, keep a low profile for a while. Those minor changes cost nothing but protect you a lot. Hope in here is a small, private thing. It's a whisper that you might get parole, that maybe you'll repair some relationships, that the one small kindness you do today will ripple into something that matters later. Hope doesn't mean denial. It means choosing to keep a part of yourself alive that isn't defined by this place. I kept mine by setting small goals, to write a letter a week, to read a book a month, to exercise 3 times a week. Tiny, repeatable actions anchored me. They were small rebellions against the erosion of time. Relationships inside prison are complicated by proximity. People are forced into cohabitation in a way the outside world rarely demands. You see parts of people that others never do, the ways they wake up, the way they handle stress, their small rituals. That kind of intimacy breeds bonds that can be fierce and fragile. I formed a bond with a guy who everyone called Steady because that's what he was. He had a way of listening that made you feel like your words mattered. We traded stories, not the headline kind, but the quieter ones that expose where people hurt. In those exchanges, I found a friend who didn't need to perform to prove anything. That kind of friendship is rare and cheap in a place that values toughness above tenderness. At the same time, alliances here can be transactional. You help someone with a commissary run and they owe you a favor. You cover a shift and they pay you back later. Those small contracts can be the difference between comfort and real hardship. I learned to be careful with promises because sometimes a favor implies a debt that asks more than you can pay. Betrayal is a constant risk. It arrives in small ways, first a missed handshake, a promise not kept, and then it swells. The worst betrayals are the ones that come wrapped in necessity. I remember a time when someone close to me had to choose between their own safety and loyalty to another person. They chose survival. I can't say I blame them. In here, survival can feel like the only moral code that reliably produces results. But betrayal cuts deep because it's personal. It rewires your sense of who you can trust. There was a moment that defined everything for me, not a single violent incident, but a quiet series of choices that added up. Someone close to me got into a mess that involved a contraband item, and the administration offered them a deal: cooperate, get reduced time, implicate others. The choice was framed like an impossible one. They chose to take the deal. It saved them. It cost others. I felt that loss like a physical blow, and for a long time I couldn't stop circling the decision like a shark circling prey. Romantic connections here are complicated. A fleeting affection can be intense because it's a rare soft thing in a place designed to strip softness away. Sometimes it's more about companionship than love. Sometimes it softens you in a dangerous way because attachments make you vulnerable. I had someone who would write to me in a way that made the days warmer, and it taught me that being loved, even in small measure, can be a tether that keeps you from breaking. Friendship also teaches you about forgiveness and limits. After a betrayal, you have to decide whether to retaliate, to forgive, or to walk away. These choices aren't moral lectures, they're strategies for survival. Retaliation invites cycles of violence. Forgiveness can leave you open to future hurt. Walking away sometimes costs you the human connection you need. There's no right answer. You pick the path that keeps you alive, and if you're lucky, leaves your conscience in the same room as your choices. I found myself doing the math on loyalty more than once. If someone betrays you to save themselves, what does that teach you about human instinct? It teaches you that people will prioritize themselves, and sometimes you have to accept that. The acceptance doesn't make the pain smaller, it just reframes it into knowledge you can live with. Knowledge, in here, is protection. There are moments of genuine sacrifice, too. I saw a man put himself in harm's way to protect another. That kind of action reminded me that people still do brave and costly things for others, even in a place that seems to reward only the opposite. Those acts are quiet, not the stuff of movies. They're deliberate choices that cost someone comfort, and they leave a trace that lingers in people's behavior for years. In the middle of all this, my own guilt shifted shapes. At first it was raw and all-consuming. Over time, it became a quieter companion. The betrayals I witnessed taught me about human fragility. They made me less surprised by selfishness and more attentive to the small, brave things people do. In some ways, watching others fail and forgive helped me to practice a few small kinds of forgiveness on myself. I'm not absolved. I don't pretend that I am, but I can measure my days without collapsing under the weight of memory. One harsh truth I learned is that the system incentivizes certain behaviors, It can push people into corners where the right decision is obscured by fear. Understanding that doesn't make the harm harmless, it just helps you see why people do what they do. That perspective is useful when you want to survive with your humanity intact. Time is an odd thing here. It expands and contracts. A day can feel like a week if the air is heavy, and a month can fly by if your head is busy. I learned to mark progress not by big moments but by small ones. A letter answered, a visit kept, a week without getting into trouble. Those small wins add up. They're the currency of a different kind of life. Parole hearings are like being measured again. You stand in front of a panel and recite the work you've done, the programs taken, the classes you've completed. You talk about remorse in ways that feel rehearsed and raw at the same time. I practiced saying the right words, that I took responsibility, that I understood the harm, that I had plans to re-enter society in constructive ways. The panel looks for shape in your life, proof you've changed enough to risk outside. Sometimes they see it, sometimes they don't. After years of doing time and small acts of restoration, I sat in a room that smelled faintly of old coffee and bureaucracy and watched the panel vote. The wait felt like a wait measured in minutes that should have been seconds. When my name was called, the word approved felt like an object I could hold. It didn't erase the past. It didn't replace the faces of those I had hurt. But it gave me a direction. Stepping through the prison gate for the last time, I felt a mix of gratitude and terror. The outside world had moved on without me. New stores, a different skyline, friends who had rearranged their lives. I was a stranger to my own neighborhood. Re-entry is a practical and emotional scramble. You learn to fill out applications like it's a skill. You learn to explain gaps in employment without sounding like a ghost. You learn to carry your past in a way that doesn't lock the door shut for you. There were nights after release when the weight of what I'd done pressed down hard. I'd wake up convinced I'd hear sirens and see uniforms and know that time had run out on second chances. Therapy helped. Talking allowed me to articulate remorse in a way that was more than repetition. It was work to accept that feeling sorry isn't the same as being forgiven. Forgiveness is given by others or never given at all. But making amends, where possible, is something you can do. I wrote apologies, not that they were magic, and I kept myself accountable by being honest in small ways. I found a menial job at first, work that paid in the currency of routine and steadiness. There's dignity in that, in showing up and doing small things cleanly. Over time, I built trust slowly by being consistent. I sought out volunteer programs that let me mentor young men who were drifting toward the mistakes I had made. Helping another guy avoid the same spiral didn't erase my guilt, but it gave me a shape to what I'd learned. People ask whether I forgave myself. That's an awkward question because forgiveness is not a single event. It's a series of choices to live differently, to answer for the harm you caused not with words but with labor toward better outcomes. I carry the memory of that night like a scar. It's part of me, and it signals to me where I need to be careful. Sometimes it flares. Sometimes it's a dull ache. Mostly, it's a reminder. There were nights I wanted to erase everything, to rewind, to do it again, and do it differently. I can't. The lesson is heavy but simple. Mistakes have tails. They follow you. Your job, if you want to be human after disaster, is to carry them in ways that don't make you contagious. That's a clumsy metaphor, but it's accurate. You don't want your guilt to infect others. You want it to teach you. I'm not a redeemed saint. I'm not a villain either. I'm muddled and trying. I show up where I'm supposed to. I answer calls when people need help. I give time to programs that aim to spare someone else from the hurt I caused. That's what makes sense to me. It's not glamorous. It's not easy. It's the slow, grinding business of rebuilding small trust. If there's a final thing I can say about being here and then being gone again, it's this. Accountability eats pride for breakfast. Pride is a dangerous god when you're young, whispering that you're untouchable. Accountability teaches you what happens when you aren't. Living with accountability is the only honest move I have. It keeps me from repeating the same mistake that cost a life. When I think of my friend now, I picture him not as a vignette of the night that broke everything, but as the person he was, the laugh, the jokes, the little kindnesses. I do what I can to honor that, by working, by trying to steer others away from stupid bravado, by telling the truth about what a single thoughtless move can do. People hear about prison like it's a place that ends stories. For me, it was a place that rearranged one into a different, harder kind of life. Some days I still wake thinking I'm back in that cell, staring at concrete. Then I check my phone, see a message from someone I mentored, or hear the sound of my niece laughing in the background on a call, and I pick one small action. I write a letter, I volunteer an hour, I show up for work. Those are my stitches. They don't erase the whole, but they keep me from falling in. That's how it went down, not with fireworks, not with a big epiphany, but with daily decisions, embarrassing and small. That's the honest arc, a stupid joke, a fatal mistake, the grinding years, the slow work to be less dangerous to others. If anything here can be useful to anyone, let it be this: regard your hands. Don't assume they're empty when you point them at someone. The world is not a movie. Your mistakes aren't rewritable. What you can do is take the aftermath and try, every day, to turn it into something that helps rather than hurts.